right, come on back to the chair, please. And we're on the record again. I'm gonna let Mr. Slisher ask you some questions on behalf of the state to start with,
Okay.
if you would.
Thank you very much, Your Honor. Juror number 17. Are you nervous today?
Yes.
Right. You've never been through a process like this before. Is it what you expected it would be?
Yeah, it's very drawn out. Not trying to say like it's just the course of the trial.
Yeah. Have you watched court shows on TV or know much about jury selection?
I've seen some court shows, but I don't know that much about jury selection.
Okay. Well, you would be somewhat relieved to know if you were selected as a juror on this case, this would be the last day you'd have to do any talking in front of people in a courtroom, because your role would be as a passive listener. And so in a lot of ways, today would be, probably the worst part in terms of being personally nervous. And you're already, about halfway through it.
Oh yeah.
Is it something that you were anticipating? Were you thinking about being nervous before you got to court today?
I've been pretty anxious about it since I got the letter in the mail, just thinking about it today.
That's understandable. This is a big deal, and we all know that. And what we're asking you to do, today here is, to talk about your opinions, talk about possible biases you might have, and it's not a comfortable situation. We recognize that. The judge recognizes that, counsel recognizes that. And all we need, at this point is just for you to be able to look at us and just tell us what's on your mind, any opinions that you might have, and really think through, whether this is something that you can do, and not so much that you're nervous about doing it or nervous about having to answer the questions. All we can do is ask you to tell us the truth, okay? And so I need to just explore a few issues with you, and I need to hear it in your own words, because it's really tough for me, if I just say something and you say yes or no, to know what's really on your mind. And so at one point, when asked about some opinions that you may have formed before coming here to court, you were talking a lot about what your concerns might be after the fact.
Yeah.
Were your concerns or were the opinions that you formed limited to general concerns that you would have after your jury service is over, or do you have some opinions that you can talk to us about, regarding the case itself?
You were asking if I had any opinions that might interfere with or might give me a bias towards the case itself.
Absolutely, yes.
Well, I was saying before, I don't trust law enforcement. They're intimidating. I think it just they could get away with many things, and the case itself is just very. This whole thing is just very divisive, and I'm not a divisive person. I just feel like I just rather not be part of something that's so two-sided. I don't like choosing sides like that. I like to be in my own lane. Like,
So I'd like to follow up with you a little bit about the mistrust you have of law enforcement, right? And see if I can give you an example of where such mistrust could exist, but you could still be a fair juror. So, you know, growing up, you had a variety of teachers, I'm assuming, right?
Yeah.
And is it true that some of those teachers were good and some of the teachers were not so good?
Yeah.
Right? And so you would be able to distinguish that and judge each individual teacher on their own merits. It's not that all teachers are bad or all teachers are good. You have to go on an individual basis.
Right.
And so then I would ask you this question about law enforcement. Do you accept that perhaps there's some people in law enforcement who are not good law enforcement officers, but that there are people in law enforcement that are good law enforcement officers? And just like with a teacher, you would have to judge each individual on their merit, not based on what they do, right, but based on what you learn about them, what evidence you see. Would you be able to do that?
I don't know, I just kind of feel like the police department has their own interests in mind. Like I feel like they're trying to do whatever to protect themselves and like come out unscathed, if that makes sense. Like not be because I feel like they're trying to do the best they can not to get their police system or police department defunded. That's what I think it is. That they don't want to lose the presence they have and the ability they can to enforce the law. So I just feel like nobody wants to lose the job that they have, right? They don't want to see the thing they've been a part of for so long, come down because of something, whatever it may be.
And so when the judge gave you some preliminary instructions, he told you that one of the things when evaluating testimony you might consider someone's interest in the outcome of the case, right? What a witness might have to lose or gain by testifying one way or the other. Did you hear him say that?
But I didn't hear him say that. I'm pretty sure he did. I didn't hear him.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Can you finish?
No, I didn't hear him say that, but I
Okay.
think he did.
Okay. Well, does that concept make sense to you, that when you're evaluating the testimony of a witness, you may consider whether or not that witness has some kind of interest in the outcome of the case?
Yeah, that makes sense.
And would you agree that that could be any witness, not only a police officer, but any witness who testified? You could validly consider whether or not that person had an interest in the outcome of the case.
Yeah.
And so when you say that you are concerned that the police are going to be looking out for their own interest, and I believe you said not wanting to be defunded, right? Do you acknowledge that that would be the same as evaluating any witness's interest in the outcome of a particular case?
No, because the police department's part of the government. The police, it's in the name. They keep crime down so businesses and public areas can stay functioning, and also to protect the individuals that live in the neighborhoods they patrol in.
So some of the witnesses who would be called to testify, would be called to testify by the state of Minnesota in this case, would be law enforcement officers. Do you believe that you would be able to evaluate the testimony of law enforcement officers called on behalf of the state in this case in the same way that you would evaluate another witness, say a bystander?
You said there's police officers on the prosecution side?
Yes, the prosecution and the government here, I represent the government, has the burden of proof. And so we would be calling witnesses who would be police officers. Would you be able to evaluate the testimony of those police officers in the same way that you evaluate other witnesses we may call?
Yeah.
And so you would be able to do that?
Yeah.
Okay. One of the things, just to follow up, I believe when counsel was asking you questions about being impartial, and if I understood your answer, you said, I can be impartial, I can be fair and impartial, but you further indicated you don't know what the evidence is now. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So, at least before seeing any evidence in this case, are you saying that you can be fair and impartial to both sides, both the prosecution and the defense?
I have my opinions, but they're not solid.
Mm-hmm.
I'm willing to see whatever side has to say.
Okay. So you understand then that, there are two sides to every story, right? And if you were called and seated as a juror in this case, your job would be to simply evaluate the evidence that comes into court, listening to the witness testimony, looking at any documents or things that we would introduce, and deciding the case solely based on that evidence of what you see, what you hear, what we show you, and then the judge's instructions on the law. And that's it. And you'd have to leave any opinions that you may have formed beforehand out the door, but just call the case and judge the case on its merits here.
You're asking if I could do that, yes or no?
Yeah, could you do that?
Yeah, I can do it.
And do you believe that you're the type of person who can be fair to everybody? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. And you feel that you can give everyone at least a fair listen and then make your best judgment based on what you see and what you hear and what the judge tells you?
Yes.
Okay. Nothing further, Your Honor.
So just wanted to follow up with a few additional questions. It's a little bit of an unusual procedure here. Mr. Slisher asked you some questions about police officers. That's what we were talking about before. And he asked you if the government were to call police officers to testify on behalf of the government, the prosecution, if you could evaluate their testimony the same way as you would any other witness. Do you remember those questions?
Yeah.
Right. And in that regard, you said you could do that, right? Let me ask you the same question. You understand that I represent Mr. Chauvin,
Yeah.
right? Mr. Chauvin is my client, and we have an obligation to do what we feel is best to defend him. Do you understand that?
Yes.
Two parts to this. How would you feel, would you be able to evaluate police officers that the defense may call as witnesses as the same as the police officers or other witnesses that the state were to call?
No,
Why?
because they're on the defense. They have to, like I was saying before, I feel like it's about, not losing the funding or like, losing everything that they had built up over the past couple of years. I just think that there's this narrative going on about defund the police, and it's all around the country, and police departments everywhere are, doing their best to, not.
So you would have an opinion about any witnesses that the defense might call, especially if they're police officers.
Yeah,
And that opinion would be biased against those witnesses. Yes?
yes.
What if the defense calls someone other than a police officer, a citizen or a doctor or something? Would you share those same biases against those types of witnesses?
No.
So it's only if the defense were to call police officers that you would feel, as witnesses, that you would feel you couldn't set that bias aside.
Yeah, it's just, I just feel like the police, they cover for each other a lot, and some people are.
So let me just explain something to you. The defense has no obligation to call any witnesses. We don't have to ask a single question. We don't have to introduce a single piece of evidence. And it doesn't change the legal standard that the state has to prove that Mr. Chauvin's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. How do you feel about that?
I'm sorry, could you say that last sentence again?
Sure. I'm just going to repeat the question and maybe a little different. The defense has no obligation to call a witness. The defense has no obligation to enter evidence. The defense has no obligation to even ask a single question during this trial. And if we did not do that, if we did not call witnesses or present evidence, the state of Minnesota still has to prove Mr. Chauvin guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Do you understand that?
Yeah.
And so if the defense called police officers to testify for them, you would be biased against those witnesses, right? But if the defense called other witnesses, doctors, civilians, you wouldn't share that same bias.
Yeah.
So how would you feel if the defense did nothing?
I want to know how to feel. Part of me wants to say that if the defense had nothing to, give support to their side, it says something about the defendant and the case they're in. But also it could just be that maybe the defendant's side of the story holds more merit than the other side, so they don't need to call witnesses and gather a whole bunch of evidence.
The court like to inquire further?
Juror 17, I just want to ask one question. We're talking about listening to the various witnesses. I also was wondering, the job of the jury is to sit through and listen to all the evidence, and we get some long days here. How do you think you can focus, keep the attention to all the evidence, yet not act on it until the end of the case?
I don't know. I mean, I think this trial is going to go on for a very long time. I don't know if I can give all my effort and focus.
Okay.
Day
Can
to day.
you expand on that?
It's just coming here every day. I'm in a group of people I don't know, and then I gotta during a trial I gotta you know, consider all the facts, all the evidence, and, you know, think for myself and just be listening. And like you were saying, like, you know, there's long days in here, so I don't know if I'd be able to recall everything to say. And in the school, it's hard for me to focus 100% of the time. I don't know how cited in I need to be during this trial.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna talk to the lawyers a little bit, and then we'll get right back to you.
Okay.
You can just stay right in that seat. Juror 17, I'm gonna make a finding under Minnesota Rule of Criminal Procedure 2602 subdivision 4, paren 4, that conducting voir dire for the next couple of minutes might interfere with an overriding interest, specifically your legitimate privacy interest. And so I'm going to order that the audio feed to be cut. So basically, we're not. Juror 17, I'm going to excuse you from this panel. I think there might be better juries for you to sit on than going to a case of this magnitude. So you'll go with the deputy, and they'll release you, and we'll make a record shortly after. But thank you for your honest answers. I have a feeling you were being as honest and thoughtful as you could, and we do appreciate that.
All right.
Thank you, sir.
Have a good afternoon.
You too. Yeah. All right. Mr. Nelson.
I don't believe that the TV audio may have been cut off during our those conversations.
Where were we on the audio?
We just received a text message from someone asking specifically what
Cognitive issues? Yeah.
Were we cut?
He gave me a thumbs up when you said that they cut off the audio, so he says it was off.
Okay.
However, the white noise wasn't on, so we in the courtroom couldn't hear it.
That may be the case, is that people in the courtroom could hear.
Yeah, except for the person who texted us was not in the courtroom.
They're just watching.
She confirmed she couldn't hear.
Okay, sorry.
All right. All right. Okay, the court has excused juror number 17 for cause. He did indicate in response to Mr. Nelson's questions that he would treat police officer witnesses differently based on who called them, the state versus the defense, and he would apply a different standard to the defense. That's in addition to concerns that we shared off the record. The state probably isn't joining in as much, but he's 19 years old. He seemed overwhelmed. He seemed extremely anxious when he first came in, and I agree with the state. I think his demeanor improved, and he may have calmed down a little bit, but he admitted that the idea of sitting through a long day of testimony, he would have a hard time paying attention as he did. In fact, mentioned how he had problems at paying attention in school. And on the questionnaire, not to leave that to last, but he did say he did not want to be on the jury for all the reasons that are stated in his questionnaire, which we've already made an oral record of. So anything to add to that record, however? I think the state objected to the challenge for cause, but any other record to make?
I did object, Your Honor, and maintain the objection, but I appreciate the time and care with which you allowed the question to proceed.
All right. Anything else, Mr. Nelson?
No, Your Honor.
All right, we'll bring in juror number 19. Would you have a seat right in the chair, sir? Good afternoon, and thanks for your patience.
No problem.
You are juror number 19, correct?
That is correct.
All right. Before I turn the questioning over to the attorneys, I'm going to ask you a few questions, but first administer an oath so that all the questions you answer are under oath. So if you could raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that you will truthfully answer all questions about your qualifications to serve as a juror?
I do.
All right. First thing I want to ask is about the questionnaire you filled out quite a while ago.
Sure.
Was everything that you answered on that questionnaire true?
Yes, sir.
And do you have any changes, amendments, addition to the questionnaire that you can think of at this moment?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. The attorneys might ask some specific questions that might prompt a memory that you want to change what you said or add to it, because sometimes on reflection, more information might become aware to you. Now, as far as the case itself, I believe you indicated you know something about the case, I assume through the media.
That's correct.
And the question I have for you is, after you filled out that questionnaire, or as part of that questionnaire, it advised you not to read any articles, follow the media on it. But sometimes, inadvertently, you might see a headline, or maybe a friend or something talks to you about the case, because you're not supposed to tell anybody you're a possible juror.
Right.
Did any of that happen between when you filled out the questionnaire and now?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay, so you weren't exposed to anything about the case, about the parties, anything like that?
No, sir.
All right. Now, because one of the reasons we say not to read any articles is you have to put aside anything you've learned outside of the courtroom, any opinions that, because you can come in here with opinions, that's not a problem. I mean, most people probably have an opinion about the case or some of the facts. The question is, can you put those aside and decide the case before you, if you're a juror, based solely on the evidence and the law that I give you?
I believe I can, yes, sir.
All right. And you were given a long list of witnesses.
Yes.
Did you recognize anybody?
No, sir.
All right. And what about the length of the trial? We estimate it'll be about 4 weeks starting on March 29th. So that's when actual opening statements and evidence would be in. You'd probably be in trial here full-time for probably about 4 weeks. Does that work?
Yeah.
All right. Anything else that you wanted to bring up before I turn it over to the attorneys?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
All right. I'll turn to Mr. Nelson and ask him to inquire. Mr. Nelson.
Good afternoon, sir.
Afternoon.
Again, my name is Eric Nelson. I represent Mr. Chauvin in connection with this case. Just have a few questions I'd like to go over kind of generally with you, and then from there, ask you some specific questions about your questionnaire. And
Sure.
your responses there. You good with that?
Yes, sir.
All right. So just you and I meet in some social situation. What are two or three things you'd want me to know about you walking away?
I'm an honest person, straightforward, and easy to talk to.
Okay. And when you received your jury summons, what was your first reaction?
Just trying to figure out dates that work best with work. I've done it 5 years ago, roughly. That time might not be exact, but I've done it recently, and it was more so just trying to make sure that I could find a week that worked well.
Okay. Did you postpone your jury service at some point and then end up here, or was this the
I
original?
did not. This was original.
Okay. When you received that jury notice, did it also include the questionnaire that you filled out?
I believe that was the second round of information I received. I believe first was just the dates, and then second was the questionnaire.
Okay. When you got that second mailing, the questionnaire, and you realized that it was in connection with this case, what was your reaction?
Just that it's my civil service to fill that out, and if chosen as a juror, to fulfill that.
Okay. When you got to court today or yesterday, whichever day was your first day, what did you think when you saw the government center?
Was a little surprising. I haven't been downtown recently. I used to work just across the street, so even pulling into the parking lot and that being gated up was just a like I said, hadn't been down in this area of Minneapolis recently.
Okay. So when you say it was surprising, like what do you mean? Like just the scope of it, or?
Yeah, I'd say that's it. Just the gating and all the protective things in place
Okay.
was not. I guess could have expected that, but wasn't expecting it.
Do you have any concerns about your personal safety serving as a juror on this case?
No, sir, I do not.
How about for your family?
No, sir.
Do you have any concerns about COVID-19 and how that may affect your service?
No, sir.
Okay. So, let me just ask you a couple questions. In terms of your personal or professional life, can you think of a situation where you have had to resolve a conflict between two people?
Yeah, I'd say have.
Can you give me an example of, I mean, without referencing who, or just give me an example of
Sure. I'm in client service, so that there's conflicts all the time back and forth on project deadlines, things that need to be met, and working through those together to find an amicable answer.
and how do you ultimately approach the resolution of conflict between two people?
It's in a conversation, meeting together, talking live, working through what both sides are looking for, and making sure we meet amicably.
Do you have to go through that process in a group setting in your professional life?
Yeah, I work on teams a lot of the time.
Okay. And what happens if you have two team members who disagree about the appropriate course of conduct? How do you resolve that type of conflict?
We work through it as a team, and once we decide as a team, that's the path we go forward with.
Okay. How do you, what tools or decision-making processes do you bring to the table to try to build consensus within a team?
I would like to think that we use more facts and emotions in those cases. Obviously, emotion is going to play into that, but if we're truly having inside the team an issue that we need to talk through, and making sure that we're breaking it down to what are the facts are, what do we need to work to, what's the answer that we need to get out of this conversation, and being productive with that.
Okay. You understand that this is a group decision-making process in a sense, if you were to be selected as juror in this case.
I do.
Okay. And ultimately, in terms of your role as a juror in this case is to weigh the evidence, right?
Yes, sir.
Are you able, would you be able to listen to the evidence from both sides?
I believe so, yes.
Would you be able to keep an open mind until all of the evidence
I
is
believe so,
presented?
yes.
Okay. Would you be able to, if ultimately you felt that the state of Minnesota failed to meet its burden to prove this case beyond a reasonable doubt, would you have any reservation in finding Mr. Chauvin not guilty?
If that's the path that was laid out, no.
Okay. And conversely, the other way too, right?
That's correct.
Okay. You obviously are familiar with the case to some degree.
That is correct.
And have you formed an opinion, a personal opinion about innocence or guilt in this case yet at this time?
I have not, because I have not examined it from the viewpoint of the law.
So in that regard, how would you examine it here if you were a juror?
I would have to take the charges that were brought against the defendant, and based on the facts that are presented, determine whether that's met.
And what would your response be if you just didn't have enough information?
I think then the burden of proof is on the prosecution in that case, and that the defendant's presumed innocent until proven guilty.
Right? And what would you do?
Then I would deem him innocent in this case.
And what happens if you were then in a deliberation room and somebody else felt differently?
I would talk through the facts and circumstances of why I believed that innocent would be the case, and I'd hear their case of why they think that might not be the case, and whether that be something that I had forgotten through the trial or jogs my memory, but make sure that we're both talking through with the facts presented.
And you'd be willing to re-examine your own views?
I would. I think I would have to.
Okay. And what if you felt it was just a critical piece of information and you weren't willing to change your mind? after this discussion?
If I still felt that my viewpoint was the one that I believed in, I think I'd stand by that viewpoint.
Now, in terms of your questionnaire, you had the first question just sort of asked you to recite what you had heard or what you knew about this particular case.
Yes.
And one of your statements reads that after that time, George was unresponsive. The police officers did not try to resuscitate George while the ambulance arrived. Can you just explain, like, what do you mean? Where did you get that information?
Before I was informed that I would possibly be a part of this case, that is what I remember from news reporting at the time.
Okay. So since that time, you've not
No,
read
sir.
it? Okay. Have you talked to other people about the fact that you're a potential juror in this case?
No, sir.
Now, you indicated that your view of the defendant in this case, Mr. Chauvin, was somewhat negative. And what you write is, from what I remember, they held a knee on his neck for 7 minutes and did not attempt to resuscitate him when he was not breathing. Can you expand on what you mean by somewhat negative and your thoughts in that regard?
Somewhat negative because the fact is someone died, and that's obviously not a positive thing by any means, and that he should be given the same justice that I'm here to help try and be a part of hearing in the case amongst his peers.
So who should be given that same justice?
Ideally, George should have at the time, and so the fact that he is not here to be held in front of a court for the crimes that he was being apprehended for is the somewhat negative that I was referring to in my questionnaire.
Okay. So is it fair to say that you have formed at least a preliminary opinion as to innocence or guilt?
I would not say that's the case. I'd say that somewhat negative is due to the fact that he's dead, and the innocence or guilt is in relation to the law and the charges brought, which I have not considered against that viewpoint.
Now, you indicated that in your questionnaire again that you've watched the video about the citizen bystander video 2 or 3 times, right?
That is correct.
In full from start to finish?
I would not say in full. I believe it was as a part of news articles, so I don't believe I would have ever seen fully start to finish, but clips of it, yes.
And it's fair to say that you've not seen any other evidence in this case?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay. So prior to receiving this juror questionnaire, you weren't following this in the media to any significant extent?
Not actively, no.
I'm sorry?
Not actively, no.
Okay. But you did have some conversations with family, friends, coworkers, things of that nature, right?
Yeah, I think that just the shock that it had on the city, where there were natural conversations that came up both with my family and the workplace, and yes, I partook in those.
Okay. And did you have friends or family member who may have taken different viewpoints of the circumstances?
I not necessarily know. I don't think the conversations were revolving around any judgment upon the case, but just the happenings of what was out there.
Well, I guess what I mean by that is that there's lots of ripple effects, right? From any incident. And so some people will take a position one way and another person will take a contrary position. Any of the conversations that you had with your family, friends, or coworkers, did they differ?
Not materially, no.
Okay. Would you describe those conversations as more political in nature or specific to the facts of this case?
More political in nature, and just the community in general.
Do you think that any of the opinions that you or your friends share in terms of the politics, lowercase p, of this situation would influence your ability to be fair and impartial in this case?
No, I don't believe so.
So no one's expecting you to not have any biases or any concerns, or the question is, can you set those aside?
Understood.
And you think you can do that?
Yes, sir.
You also indicated that you have a friend who is a police officer.
That is correct.
Is he a police officer with the Minneapolis Police Department?
I believe so.
Okay. Have you talked about this situation prior to the jury questionnaire with your friend?
I did not, no.
You indicate you haven't seen him very often since COVID?
No, not often, no.
How close of a friend would you describe this to be?
He's not a super close friend. I'd say more of a friend of a friend.
Okay. How often prior to COVID, how often would you see him?
2 times a year, maybe.
Okay. Would he talk about his job?
Occasionally.
Okay. Would he kind of tell you the stories of arrests he's made and stuff like that?
Not so much. More so, he has a canine as a part of his duty and just talks about his dog mostly.
Okay. If you were selected as a juror on this case, would you call up your friend and ask him his opinion? And
No, as I don't believe I should be talking with anyone outside these walls about the case.
would you be concerned that if you were to find Mr. Chauvin guilty, that could damage your friendship with this person?
No, I would not.
And conversely, would you feel any obligation to find him not guilty by virtue of this relationship?
No.
You had some karate lessons when you were 7 or 8 years old,
I did.
like pretty much every other kid in the state?
Just wanted to answer to the best of my ability.
Right, understood. You also had some opinions as to both Black Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter.
Yeah.
Would you care to expand on either of those opinions?
I think what I wrote there is consistent with my thoughts.
Okay. You support Black Lives Matter in a general context, right?
That is correct.
But you disagree with some of their tenets, is what you wrote?
That is correct.
Can you explain that?
I think some of the ways that, depending on group members, have gone about it has not always been the best actions, but I do believe that Black Lives Matter.
And you also have a somewhat unfavorable opinion of Blue Lives Matter.
That is correct.
Did you ever have that conversation with your police officer friend?
I have not, no.
Okay. You also indicated that you have some friends who are lawyers.
That is correct.
Same question, I'm expecting the same response, that you're not gonna call them and ask them, hey, Cahill said the law is this, Mr. Judge Cahill has said the law is this, is he right?
No, sir.
Okay. You previously also had served on a jury, right?
That is correct.
Was that here in Hennepin County?
It was
And you said that was maybe 5-6 years ago or something?
roughly, like I said, don't know the exact year, but yeah, roughly that time frame.
And you ultimately did not take a part in those deliberation process.
That is correct. I was an alternate.
Did you have a good experience?
I think as good as an experience as you can have.
Okay. Was it a longer trial?
It was about a week, if my memory serves correctly.
Were you disappointed that you didn't get to take part in the deliberation process?
Slightly, yeah. I think after hearing the process, I formed an opinion and sat through it, so I was looking forward to it, as I think it's an important part of our society.
And in terms of that experience, I mean, you had kind of a preview, right, leading up to this, there's some delays here and there, right?
Yeah.
But ultimately, there's nothing about that experience that would impact or impair your ability to be fair in this case?
No, sir.
Just want to follow up on one last question in your questionnaire. You indicated that it is a busy time for work, but that you could fulfill your civic duty in this case, right?
Yes, sir.
All right. So would you be going to work after jury duty and staying late, or how would you handle that?
Yeah, so I would be on leave, but there's probably some things I'd still have to pitch in and work through at night.
Okay. Is it like, would you end up having to pull all-nighters and anyway have it affect your ability to serve here as a juror?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay. Your Honor, I'll pass for cause.
Mr. Slusher. Thank you. Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
So juror number 19,
Yes, sir.
you discussed in your questionnaire some information that you gathered or had prior to filling out the questionnaire about the case itself. And I just want to follow up on a couple of things. I think the first thing that I'd like you to explain a little bit further is that you said in news stories that you heard that George Floyd may have been under the influence of hard drugs, I think
Yes.
is what you described. And can you please tell me what you believe you've heard about that?
Trying to recollect back, just that there may have been drugs in his blood, but I cannot confirm or deny whether that is a truthful story at this time.
Aside from whether or not the story is truthful, I was interested that you use the term hard drugs. What do you define as hard drugs?
Anything that I wouldn't consider a recreational drug, so anything more than marijuana.
Okay. And so what effect, what ran through your mind when you heard this? Regardless of whether or not it's true, that George Floyd may have been under the influence of hard drugs.
Frankly, I don't think that should have much impact on the case, as whether you're under the influence of drugs doesn't determine whether you should be living or dead.
And I believe you also stated that you think that you heard that George Floyd had what you called a checkered past.
Yes.
Can you describe what you meant by that?
If I remember correctly, he has served previously prison sentences, or at least been convicted of crimes in the past.
And that's what you heard in the media?
That's what I heard in the media.
I think you also said that you believe that you heard that it involved a domestic disturbance.
I believe that's one of the cases that I had heard about, yes.
Can you describe for us what you think you heard about that, just as much detail as you can recall?
There's not a lot there, but just that one of his previous charges, at least, I don't know if it was conviction or not, had to do with either domestic assault or just domestic disturbance.
So, one thing that you were asked in terms of prior information that you've heard, maybe prior opinions that you formed before coming here today, you were asked whether or not you could set those opinions aside and decide the case based solely on the evidence that you hear. Now, you may or may not hear any evidence like that at all. But just in the back of your mind, as you would be listening and thinking about this case, let's say you didn't hear any evidence regarding anything about George Floyd's past. Do you think you'd be able to put that out of your mind, or would it still, kind of be in the back of your mind that maybe George Floyd had some run-ins with the law?
I think I'd be able to set that aside because each case should be tried on its own.
And if you did hear information like that, that he'd had some run-ins with the law prior to the day that he died, do you think that that would have an effect on how you would decide the actions of those involved on that particular day?
I don't believe so, as I just said. I think that the trial should stand for itself as alone. What has happened in the past shouldn't be on trial here.
Can you, without disclosing, your precise title or the place you work, just provide a little bit more information about what exactly you do in your job?
Yeah, so I'm an auditor. So with that, I look at companies' financial statements to make sure that they're in accordance with the accounting standards.
Okay. And as an auditor, I think you said this is a busy time. Is this a particularly busy time for you as an auditor?
It's a little better right now. January is probably the worst, but here through June is busier than the second half of the year, yes.
And if you were seated as a juror in this case, on behalf of both sides, we'd be asking you to commit your full and undivided attention to this trial, to all of the witnesses who testify, to all of the exhibits that are offered, to all of the instructions of the judge. Would you be able to do that?
Yes, sir.
And you gave a good affirmative answer there. I just wanted to revisit an answer you gave before
Yeah.
a couple of times when asked the question about would you be able to put aside any opinions you may have formed or media accounts you have heard. And I think you said, I believe I can, or I think I can. And just need to be, very clear here, because if you were a pilot instead of an accountant, and I was about to get on your plane and I'd say, hey, are you gonna land this plane safely in Phoenix like we have planned? And you said, I believe so. I might turn around. And so I just need to, hear from you when you say that you believe that you can set aside your prior opinions. Do you mean you can, or are you unsure?
I believe I can to the best of my ability.
Okay. And so when you say you believe you can, does that mean that you will, or that you'll just try?
That I will.
That you will.
Yes, sir.
Getting back to the issue of your college friend, or the friend of a friend who serves as a police officer.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you, if you had to evaluate the testimony of a police officer versus any other witness, do you believe that you would, take the word or the testimony of a police officer over that of a different witness, say a bystander?
Unless the question was directly related to subject matter that a police officer would have more knowledge on than a normal citizen, no.
So to draw that out a little bit, if you had two people seeing the same event, one, witness A was a police officer, witness B was a bystander, and they were just simply reporting what they saw, would you have a reason to believe one person over the other if what they said was something different?
No.
Okay. But if the officer was testifying about something, using your friend with the canine, for example, you'd probably tend to believe what that person would have to say about how his canine works over just some casual person who would
Yes,
describe.
I would assume a police officer would know more about the canine unit than someone that does not work within that portion of the police department.
So it sounds to me that it would be fair to say your opinion wouldn't just be exclusive to police officers, but you would tend to believe, say, a physician about medical things over a bystander or someone who is untrained.
That would be correct, yes.
Okay. I think I understand. One moment, Your Honor. Thank you. I have no further questions, and I really appreciate your candor here today.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Juror 19, you will serve on this jury.
Okay.
So what we're gonna do is, we're gonna have you come back, you're free to go about your business until March 29th. And we'll have you back here at 9 a.m., and the deputies will escort you to the courtroom, where you'll wait until we start the trial itself. We're anticipating about 4 weeks. In the meantime, you're not an investigator, don't talk to people about the case, don't try and check up on the case.
Will I be getting any further information in case the 29th is not the date, or will there be any confirmation before that point?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm making that commitment now since it's 3 weeks away. I don't want you to forget. We will definitely contact you if that changes, as you've already seen. Sometimes there are unforeseen delays. We're pretty confident in that date, so I think we're gonna go with that. But, so if you don't hear from us, March 29th, 9 a.m., please be here. But I'm gonna ask the jury office to give reminder calls to everybody.
Sounds good. Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you, sir. We have one juror left, but we have been going since 8 a.m. How do you want to proceed? Do you want to wait until tomorrow? We can talk a little bit about what motions we're going to hear at 8 a.m. tomorrow. Let the last juror go. All right, I think we're going to recess for the day because it is 4:26. And we'll ask jury number 20, Greg, Mr. Schaefer? Would you make sure you tell them when you let them go, they'll be the first on our list at 9 o'clock?
Before we recess, if I can make a record of our bench conference regarding the matter we discussed this morning.
Yes.
Regarding juror reports. Thank you, Your Honor. As the court recalls, juror reports, as that term is used as a subject of a motion in limine this morning. Following that motion, we had a brief discussion in chambers about the definition of a report of a juror and distinguishing between criminal history reports and work product. And I believe that our conversation was that the defense was requesting criminal history reports. As a result of that conversation, we disclosed the criminal history reports run for jurors 1 through 6 prior to the beginning of voir dire this morning. And then over the noon hour, it is my understanding that the balance of those reports were provided to counsel. And so I believe that we've satisfied our obligations there and that the defense is agreeable to that.
Okay. Mr. Nelson, anything to add?
No, Your Honor, that's accurate. And I acknowledge receipt of the criminal history reports.
All right, thank you. With regard to motions, what are we gonna be handling tomorrow morning? Do we have numbers that you can give me so I can, I've looked at all of them before, but I would like to brush up just in case.
If we may go have a discussion for some minutes.
All right, we'll go off the record.
So last night, Mr. Frank.
We're on the record. Go ahead. I just said we're on the record.
Last night, Mr. Frank and I had conversations about the motions that we intended to argue for today. I don't think that the email confirming those got sent until this morning. So I would just propose that Mr. Frank and I be given another opportunity to confer. I don't think he's in the courtroom right now. And I'll get that email to you earlier so we can brush up. But by my record, I believe that state's amended motion 2 is the only state motion remaining. The original 2 as amended by their March 4th filing. I believe that number 30 remains, number 31 remains, number 32 remains, number 33 remains. 34 has been partially dealt with. 36 remains. Let me just double check. Number 22 does still remain. I apologize if I... Number 23 remains.
All right, so we've got a substantial amount. Why don't we do this? Send an email to all parties in, my personal email, my court email, tonight, and just so we all know kind of ahead of time.
Yeah.
If that's possible.
I'll give Mr. Frank a call as soon as we're
Yeah, what's left and what specifically tomorrow morning we're gonna do. That'd be appreciated. All right, and Mr. Schaefer, do the parties have a list of who's coming in tomorrow?
So I can give them, do you want me to send an email or tell them right now?
Let's send an email, that'll work. All right, anything else for the record before we recess for the day?
Not for the state, thank you, Your Honor.
Yes or no? All right, we're in recess until 8 a.m. tomorrow. Thank you.